in the beginning. I mean, it really started with David telling me this story like 2008, I think. And he told it exactly as he later told me, like 13 years, down the line, like word for word off the top of his head. I mean, and it was always about the mantra that the killer was using to kind of make his way through each job and make it through each day. And the first version of it was very much a lot of voiceover in that very first part, the mantra into the second and third act. And when we were done and it'd been cut together, Dave was kind of like, we're going to have wall-to-wall voiceover. This is not enough. I thought just throw a lot of music in there between so for a half second I was like, oh, now I have all the more opportunity to disappoint you, David. But I said, why not go through this exercise? And it was really a tribute to him. I say that he found the right balance. Despite my laziness, we got it there. Hopefully.
Well, talk about that. That's how it happens. It's a lot. Good
night, everyone.
Thank you all for coming. No, that's how it happens. It's like you go, what if there was a joke here about this, and what if, and you kind of find your way. But that's so not okay. It's an explanation.
Well, it will have to work. You'll have to do here. But we have to talk too about my favorite scene and that joke at the end, Andy, where first that long scene between Michael and Tilda, which is just kind of astonishing. And each of these sort of set pieces, that set piece in the office, where there's a long conversation, where the tension is, how is this going to end? But he keeps telling himself, don't improvise. So there's kind of this clue. So Andy, talk about that scene in particular, structure and that scene, that long dinner.
Well, I'm loath to admit it, especially in front of Academy and Guild members, but it's a collaborative process with David. So he probably deserves to have shared screenplay credit, but he, for some reason, feels that contributing to the script is part of the director's job. That the thing that tipped that for me, like that scene, was the addition of him pulling up to this person that we kept calling her from the very beginning. I found the actual notes that I copied down in 2008, like what he told me. From the beginning, we always called, it used to be a male character, but we called that character the Ghost of Christmas Future. And David described the scene where, he's gonna pull up beside her, and he's gonna get his gun ready, and we're gonna he's gonna finish this up right here and now. It's gonna be like a carjacking. And he just goes, holy fuck, that's Tilda Swinton. So, which is the only person that,
if it works,
So then look, the trick of every one of these scenes, I'll just digress and hopefully bounce back to what you're saying. David said from the very beginning, write this so that the killer literally, of spoken dialogue, is 10 lines of dialogue. And I was like, well, that would be amazing. Like, that's a great challenge. So I really did first draft. I got it down to, some of them were rambling run-on sentences, but I got it down to 13, a baker's dozen of lines. So then when I'm watching what they've shot, and he occasionally says, like, put the card over here for the food, or he says, hold that door. I'm like, you fucker, you're adding more lines to this. But the trick of that scene was to have him sit, and literally, I think it's 2 lines that he says, and for it to come off relatively, hopefully naturally, and only he and she could pull that off, I feel. But it was the 2 samurai that meet on the road, and the knowledge in their eyes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
We're talking about collaboration here, and Ren, I've got to turn to you, because I was just telling you backstage, it's wonderful as he's talking about Paris waking up, we're hearing orally Paris is waking up. We're being immersed very slowly into this environment, which is what the movie is too. So talk about that, because I was laughing out loud hearing that line and hearing all the sounds come up sort of one after another after another.
Yeah, that was really David came up right after he filmed and started cutting with Kirk, and they assembled an edit they were feeling really good about. David wanted to experiment, just with the sound and with the soundtrack, and so we started working on that scene, and it's tricky because of course it says Paris, but it doesn't really look like Paris in the way that one would think, and there's no shot of an Eiffel Tower or Arc de Triomphe or anything like that.
Note to self.
Yes. So we thought, well, what if we filled it in with the sound of Paris, which each place that we travel has a sound to it. And luckily, I had gone to Paris a number of years ago, and I have this thing where you hear something and you go, oh, that's beautiful. If it's a motor, like a mobilette, the little scooters, or the children's voices, or whatever it may be. And we as sound editors, and we collect these sounds.
Right, you know how you normally just run and get your 2-track recorder and a stereo mic and go to the window? I mean, everyone's been through this.
It's like, wow, that's exactly what we all do.
Well, I think we all experience it and we enjoy it. I enjoy it and think maybe I should capture it. So that's how I was lucky enough to go, I think I have some of these sounds laying around. And then you try to find little homes for these things. So there are these little beautiful sounds that need to find their way into the soundtrack. And so that's how we kicked off our sound mix of that scene. And then David got interested in the idea of making the film sound like a documentary where the camera would have a microphone on top of it.
We talked about doing this actually on Fight Club years ago. We talked about the idea of like waking up in a new place and like the jarring vertical effect of like, oh, there's a new ambience. And we just kind of felt on this, because it was only going to be an hour and 53 minutes, that we wouldn't tax the audience's ears so much by allowing, the sense of an ENG camera just recording what's in front of it, that you would get this specific, sort of the oral volume capture. And he makes it sound so easy. It is so labor intensive to create sounds that are going to root you and make you understand the layout, north, south, east, and west of a set, that you can then pivot it for every time you cut to a 90-degree angle. It is so involved, and I'm so glad we didn't do it on Fight Club, because we'd still be mixing that fucking movie. It was so involved, and the ability to figure out what we don't need. Because you have 96 tracks and 3 sidecars, and you kind of go, we can do it all, but the ear can only handle so much of it at a time. And so it really requires somebody with some real expertise to be able to go, we're losing that, we're losing that, we're losing that.
But it feels like such a patient mix, because as you were talking about, you mentioned the kids, man. We hear the sound of kids playing in Paris, but when in San Domingo, we hear babies screaming and crying. So, everything sort of, these great sort of emotional references that sort of bounce back and forth. So there's all this sort of density, this oral density, because we're not seeing the killer actually do a whole lot. So just having all that kind of sound information is really kind of amazing to me.
Yeah, it was really a great learning experience. And then Eric and I we were talking, and the scene in the fight, what was really fun, learning how he structured it with David visually, and trying to teach the audience through the killer's eyes where this brood is in the home, and how he filmed it with David, and then how we had to kind of follow that screen direction with the sound to tell the audience what the killer's hearing and where this menacing fellow is in the house. So there's a lot of localization of sound as well with picture.
I'm glad you brought that up, Ren, because Eric, some of the scariest stuff takes place in the dark. I mean, the setup at the very beginning of the movie, that big extended fight sequence, I mean, even that walk down to the lake at the end of the movie. Talk about shooting that stuff and how much information you wanted us to get.
Well, it's a lot easier in the dark because you don't have to do any lighting, you know.
Good night, everybody. Drive safely.
It's all of our conversations in this movie were all about point of view and pace, really, you know, and it was the kind of broad look conversations were, okay, it should be dark here, you know. Okay, we're in the Dominican Republic, it should be bright and hot here, you know. But everything was about what the audience sees, what they don't, what he sees, when it's objective, when it's subjective, and you know, and it was fascinating going through it and hearing David's, okay, we'll do this with picture, we'll do this with sound, we'll do this with picture and sound, we'll do this with where they're complementary, we'll do this where they're in opposition, and sort of thinking about the movie. It was the first movie I've done where I've really thought about structure in a way, in kind of a new way, you know, in terms of how the whole film is constructed and how this individual scenes are constructed, because so little of it involves pointing the camera at actors saying lines. You know, it's very much about, the film was about including things in the frame that were of particular importance. I mean, in terms of the darkness, yeah, and the fight scene is meant to be just sort of barely perceptible. So you get a sense for what's going on. You get a sense for where everybody is, but you don't see every hit. You might hear it or you don't hear it.
Well, talk about that too, because there's a kind of a misdirection involved. You're really not pointing the camera where we're expecting to see it.
In the fight scene? Yeah, for me, the fight scene has a really kind of clunky setup, which is you have two guys who are equally adept at murder, and one of them is just watching a home improvement show and doing his hair, and the other one is looking for him to put a bullet in the back of his head. And the idea of, and this was Dave McCormick's here, but they in the stunts, you know, we kept saying, like, you got to do it without all the grunting and groaning. You've got to do it without all the kind of stuff that we're normally, because they don't want to wake up the next door neighbor, because they don't want, you know, Florida Highway Patrol to come by and knock on the door and have to explain what's happening in here. They've got to be able to dispatch one another. So, I mean, the scene is loud, but it's surprising how once we ducked all of the actual efforts out of it, how weirdly the behavior seems so strange. And I think that's one of the things that, I mean, there's certainly a lot of sound pressure in every one of those hits, and every time the wall crushes and the dust flies off. But for the most part, these guys are not making any noise. And it is one of those things that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up, because you're going, I haven't seen that.
But we're talking about this too, and we'll bring you this now, Kurt, because as we're moving into, as he goes home to San Domingo, and each cut, we're getting the lighting changes, but we're also getting like less and less sound. There's also this sort of thing from going noisy to quieter to just sort of natural sounds, and each cut varies in length as there's more information given. When you talk about cutting that sequence together, just so that drive, it's pretty amazing stuff.
That's all. That drive is about telegraphing you're safe. So it's relax, you're home, calm, breathe, and then cigarette butts. And that's how exacting he is. To me, that was the thing I was most excited about with the movie, is that it was this singular character where you're not really hiding in dialogue. Like, as a film editor, dialogue can be quite obvious in a lot of ways of how things want to get put together. This is very much a movie of, we see what he looks at, and that's all. So he's the meter for the movie, and when he's calm and in his process, things are relaxed. And then when something's out of his plan, the pace is going to pick up. But it's all about him. He controls the dialogue scenes with where he's looking and how he's responding. He can speed a scene up, he can speed a scene down. You know, when its process is slow, stretch, something out of his plan is fast, go.
as we're talking about all these things that really, for me, come together in so many ways, it's that dinner sequence where we get to see what everybody brings to this. That it's really taking its time. It's taking so much time, in fact, that we are wondering why this is taking so long, because everything else has been so ruthless.
Used to be longer.
We could probably still take 45 seconds out of it.
But I want you to talk, because at that point it becomes a different movie, because the rhythms are so changed in the editing.
Well, I mean, this is something Andy and I discussed, from the very beginning. You basically have 5 Bernie Birnbaum scenes, right? For those of you who've seen Miller's Crossing, it's like John Turturro gets taken out into the woods and he's gonna either make a case for himself or he's gonna make a case against himself. And so the notion was they all have to be different, right? Dolores at the top of the stairs has to be very different to Leo, the cab driver, and you have to be, and by the way, like you see in 20-year-old cab driver, you go, and he makes a pretty good case for, look, I don't give a fuck. Like, I got nothing, I don't have any skin in this game. And he gets fairly easily dispatched. And then, you Hodges, like, that manipulation is obviously years old and irksome, so he has to go. But you get to Dolores, like, Dolores makes a really compelling case for maybe being let off the hook.
But he's telling us who he is all the time. Don't improvise.
Yeah. Well, and then he gets to Arliss and he's like, this guy's in charge? Huh. I don't have anything to worry about from him.
I mean, yeah, he showed, don't empathize, but look how kindly he dispatched Dolores. He fulfilled her wish.
Say it again. How kindly he dispatched Dolores.
He showed,
Ladies and gentlemen, Andrew Walker.
showed her gently down the stairs.
It's like a dance movie, put it that way.
Merrily.
But you're talking about that each of those, there's a different kind of length to each of them. I mean, they sort of get slightly longer and longer each one, so that by the end, because it's taking so long, and he's had to drink, which is, I want you to talk about that, because that's a really interesting moment, because that's when I think...
But you had, your input into that was totally different from mine, which was like, well, wait a minute. So she sends him away to get the flight. So she's trying to get him, but it's her bottle. So that would be the bottle that would be poisoned. And I was like, we didn't even think of that. That's too complicated.
She had a knife.
Yeah.
She had a knife in her purse. You saw it.
It's a much shorter movie that way. That makes all the sense in the world. I get that.
I just don't want to see the mix-up in the bar when they... Wait, that was the wrong bottle. 3 of the patrons at table 6 are dead.
You did say tenderly dispatches, so I don't think there's a whole lot of empathy about the other people at the restaurant. But I mean, I want to... Go ahead.
Well, I just want to ask you, when he takes the drink, I always saw it, I think Sion saw it as, and maybe David does too, as kind of like, just kind of a fuck you. But I saw it almost like,
Let's move this along.
okay, yeah.
That's
He's not saying that to me. It sounds like
this is not me talking to him. No, Fassbender
Yeah, it's like-
offered this up as an idea. What if the last drink, instead of waiting for her, I just go, let's get out to the snow.
Yeah, let's go.
And I was like, okay.
Let's go.
At that point in the movie, we all wanted to drink, so it was...
But that's the sequence where the film really sort of takes off for me. It is the Bernie Birnbaum scene, because it's like that. It's almost like that last scene before Gabriel Byrne kills him, where you sort of feel like, oh, well, is there going to be a power shift here? Because he has the drink, but then I thought too, he's having the drink to sort of lull her into this sort of sense of, I'm listening to you. I'm going to let down my guard, because he still doesn't talk anymore. So that drink to me felt like a little bit of a shell game. It felt like a Gabriel Byrne sort of like, I'll let you talk.
Yeah, I mean, Michael offered it up as this idea of like, let her know that we're no longer moving to your backbeat. We're going to take over the bass line and the drums for this, and we're going to move this along.
But-
and it worked really nicely on.
But I love how she, and I'm sure people hopefully noticed that she's in his head enough that she's the one who's really, other than the Brute, which is also a woman I love, but she's kind of stepping on his mantra voiceover. So I think she's a little in his head more than he wants to admit.
I guess I sort of those things too, but I still remember that description from the brother at the beginning. She looked like a Q-tip. I just thought he kept looking at her face. He's looking at that head, thinking, "Yeah, this is done." Speaking of done, we probably might have some questions from the audience. I'm not sure how we're doing this, but if you have a question, text us and we'll get back to you. Do we have mics?
But it
here?
has to be
We could
amazing.
get people to come down to front, or I don't know how we do
We're
it.
keeping all these
There are
nice
some
people here
very
so
select-
late, so only your best question.
Yeah, the one.
Real insight.
Oh, the lights are coming. Oh, Scott, there's so many people in here. There's a microphone right there. Yes. You got a question, raise your hand, we'll get the mic to you. Right down here. Okay.
Your other longtime collaborators who are not here are Tim Reisner and Atticus, and the score is phenomenal. At what point does that come into your process of mixing and driving the tempo of the film? And will it be released as a soundtrack?
I'll try to say this quickly because they're not even fucking here. But what ends up happening with these guys, because they are so singular, is that you kind of, you present them with a script, you sort of tell them what's not on the page, or what other areas you're going to sort of play in. And strangely enough, I think we had some cut footage that we gave to them before they started. So they'd seen some stuff, but it was like all that stuff, like looking into the Target apartment, like that was just a sound stage, and none of the, it required an inordinate amount of animation on top of it for it to even remotely look like what it was supposed to be. But they did this thing, and they do it often. You're never quite sure if you're being tested by Trent and Atticus. So they will send like 13 or 14 different cues, or in some cases they're loops, in some cases they're just a melody line or something. And the ones that we choose from and send back to them become kind of a Rorschach test. And so I remember we chose like 4 or 5 that we really liked, and we attempt some scenes with that stuff. And Atticus's response was, "Oh, you're going for the weird stuff," which I always love. Whenever somebody who's that dry was like, hey, "You're drinking out of the weird bottle." I'm a contrarian, so I tend to kind of want to keep going. But we ended up because we were trying to find stuff that worked at high frequency and low frequency and left the middle frequency for the voiceover. We kind of ended up gravitating towards the stuff that was very music concrete, and so that was kind of, that's sort of
One of the first tracks they sent was what we used for the getaway in Paris.
Yeah.
In the first batch that came.
the vocal choral.
Yeah, and it didn't come with instructions. It was like, what do you think of this? And
But it was a
we
test.
placed it on that scene because it was almost counterintuitive, because you'd be used to seeing music on a scene like that starts going, the chasing, we're in the chase now. And this immediately, when it went wrong, it was that much more internal sound working almost like a sonic version of his mantra. It was almost like a discipline, kind of going, there's a plan for this. We've thought this through. Relax, slow down.
Yeah. The other thing that I really enjoyed about mixing their music was the sounds that they create, Trent and Atticus, and particularly in this score with this throbbing, low frequency. It's almost like a modern music concrete version of a heartbeat that's just pulsating. And that's a really great space to occupy in the mix because it creates a sense of anxiety and tension, and yet you don't really notice it. It's this thing that's just sort of percolating under the
Which
narrative.
means it's complementing the oral mix you've done too, which is all about sort of like this shell game of making things quiet. Those kids playing as you hear the sound of the well lubricated gun. I mean, there's no friction in any of the metal in this movie. Everything sounds like it's been like worked on, and so there must be other questions here. Nobody wants to hear me talk. Yeah, down here. Sorry to give you such a workout.
All right, big fan, great film. Question for you, having done so many iconic films in the 90s, in a very different...
Oh my God, is that you? Like iconic films in the 90s, well, let's talk about
And the odds.
Wait to see what comes next. Having worked on these kind of films with this kind of approach in filmmaking, now, as a director now, with all this different format of filmmaking, with, people having shorter attention span and watching movies like this feel like a slow burn, or, how does it feel for directors that have been doing historic films and iconic films with a different approach to filmmaking, doing a movie nowadays? Does it feel like a challenge to you, working with a different crowd, in a different format, a different audience?
Well, I think if you go, if I move the camera to the left, is it more iconic? You're probably setting yourself up for a really dismal.
I guess I'm not going to ask that question.
I feel like this movie is not necessarily a response to a filmography. It's not really like it's not like I'm going. I mean, what I liked about this idea was to do something that is this rigorously subjective. I had never subjected myself to that before, and now I know why. It's just not fun, but it's an interesting place to put an audience in, and there are some things that come out of it that are interesting. But no, I don't think in terms of, I've got to come up with something more memorable, because I think that's a fool's error.
Another question. I guess we try the side over here. Somebody have a side? Just to sort of vary it a little bit, yeah.
Hi. There was a really cool moment of sound design when
Just one?
There were a lot. But my favorite one was when Michael Fassbender's girlfriend finishes basically talking to him, and you can see him kind of deciding that he's going to go on this revenge streak, and you sort of hear like a machine power up somewhere in the hospital. I was just curious about what the thinking is behind those sort of more like emotionally evocative pieces of sound design, and how many of them are happy accidents and stuff like that.
Oh, thanks for noticing that. Yeah, that scene, David was really, and you can see at the beginning when Fassbender's running in and the lights are flickering, so he establishes this developing country situation where you're in a hospital, but the power's coming in enough because the diesel generator just kicked in because there's not electricity here, and so that creates some tension. And it was David's idea actually, he wanted to have some sort of sound that would indicate the power's off, and now it's coming back on because the generator's back online. And so that sound then, once we created that sound, then that created a noise that would pop out that would scare the babies, that would then get all the kids crying, and then that would so there was a whole sort of layering of sound, or noise as we call it. And I don't know
It's a technical term.
Yeah, noise.
Noise.
But and
We're going to need about 23% more noise
Yes.
for this.
yeah, I like calling it noise because it's what it is sometimes. But
That's precious.
yeah, it's less precious, and we just we say, let's put some other noises in. But yeah, that moment where you notice there is this, he's deciding, that's the revenge moment. And the sound of that motor kicking in, we actually really worked on that. So I really appreciate you noticing that. And that sound of it coming in and ramping up, it's him going, I'm gonna find these people. And so that sound then cuts to the beach, and now we're off on our way. So the rhythm of it really kicks off from that sound.
And you mentioned a couple times, you seem to have an inordinate amount of baby crying sounds in your collection. Screaming
I'm not
children.
happy till the babies cry.
Screaming children.
That's where we're going to end it, ladies and gentlemen. Let's thank the crew here.
Thank you all for hanging out with me.